Hello, everybody. I am here today with a guest that I had one of the most just in-depth and amazing conversations that I have ever had on the podcast about kind of stress and hustle culture. I am so stoked to welcome you back, Taylor. We have Taylor Cashdan here with us today. Welcome.
Hey, Sagra, happy to be here.
Yes. So last time we got really into something that is really close to my heart, which is this idea that we live in almost a cult of busy and that there's this addiction to stress that's going on for a lot of people in our industry, myself included. I know in the last, has it already been like 9 months or something since we talked? I have just dove much deeper into this on a personal level. And I'm just curious with all the stuff that's been going in the world to hear a little bit about how this has evolved for you. But before we get into that, I'm going to start by asking the same questions I always love to start with. So first of all, Taylor, what is your superpower?
It's an interesting question. I think when in some of the pre-call stuff, I had to think about that because I find trouble with self-prescribing things like that, and it goes into like that stresses me out, which is just really funny in the theme of this. But I guess if I had to put it into something specific, I like to bring order to chaos. Breaking down complex problems into digestible steps. My background's in education, so it's like how to reformat like difficult things to be consumable by those who don't know it, right? And that's been a very applicable skill across my career and personal life thus far.
Well, despite the fact that that kind of gave you a little bit of pause and maybe like heightened your cortisol levels a little bit, that's a freaking great answer. So just going to put that out there. Not only is that something that the world needs, which is kind of a spoiler to my next question, but that was just very succinctly put. So thank you. But I'd love to hear in your own words, why does the world need this? Why does the world need what you do? Why does the world need order from chaos?
Yeah, I think there's a few spokes to that. Like in general non-pandemic life, right? There's so many things going on at once where we often forget to take a second and like live in the moment, right? Whether we're solving an issue or we're like at the drive-through line of a fast food joint. Like there's always something else we're thinking about. And that complexity becomes weighing on you, right? It brings down your mental capacity. It brings down your physical capacity. And oftentimes we burden ourselves with too much, like problems we can't solve, right? Or things that we're thinking too far ahead that we need to handle the thing of today. So I've had to, we talked about last time, my story is like I've had to slow down all that. But then when you layer on the pandemic and all the other things in the world that are happening, like there's so many problems, right? So to speak, around. There's something called decision fatigue, right? Where we're having to make choices every day about 1,000 things, about our personal safety, about our family safety, about work, about life, about all these things that there's a numbness that we internalize. And I think part of that is like, if we can bring some order to that, if we can come up with a framework that like helps us kind of disconnect from the stuff, but then reconnect to what matters, it'll help us recenter and kind of make it through the day kind of thing.
Yeah, preach. I mean, since the pandemic has been, decision fatigue is already a huge issue in our industry. I know it's a huge issue for me and basically everyone on my team. Never mind with this pandemic where even months and months in, this is recorded in August. So I think we're at least 6 months in already. We're still having to sometimes make the same decisions we've already made, just remake them on a new day or a new week because new information is coming out, new context is coming out. So I agree. I mean, if you're going right to my heart, talking about simple processes that help us navigate life, that's like, just got chills. So I'm super stoked to get into that. I agree. I think the world really, that's important, especially right now.
For sure.
So on this topic of stress, on this topic of COVID, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your context. How have the last few months of COVID and all of the changes that has bred in our lives and in the industry, how have they impacted you and your stress level?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm lucky enough to still have my job. And I'm privileged in the sense of I can work from home. So that's been the biggest transition for me, is like figuring out how. I'm a very social person, as you could probably tell by our conversations, but I thrive off being around others, right? So this like isolation period is very difficult for me. Not only like on a personal level, but like in a work context of like, I like to flush ideas out, like sticky notes on the wall, like discuss things at the water cooler kind of thing, which is kind of hard to do on video, right? Or to just be like, hey, can you guys like get on this video for no reason? I just want to vent about something. Like, it's just weird to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm missing a lot of that connective tissue, and my company and many other companies around have tried to mend that as best they can. But I think that's been my personal struggle. And the other thing is like my home was never set up for like a work from home setup. Like I have an office, that's really my play space for all of my design and creative projects. And obviously you could tell by the video, storage, but it was never set up to be like a full-time office. So I was having trouble for the first couple months of like separating work from play, because I would go from like work computer, right? Close that, open personal computer, and never move like from my seat. So I
Yeah.
was having screen fatigue. I was having like literal like ass in chair fatigue. Like I was stuck in this box all day, like between screen, bed. And I had to figure out ways to kind of break that down to separate work from play so that I would enjoy them both separately again, before it became some sort of other toxic, pathway.
Yeah, yeah. So what I'm hearing, some of the kind of impacts that have had on your life, I think stuff that a lot of people can relate to in terms of the uncertainty and decision fatigue. But quite literally, I'm hearing that even having a job still, even, with your work security being there and working from home, the main challenges you've been experiencing are really, it all moves together. You're like working and then you're having fun, but maybe you're still using technology. And without some sort of clear delineations between that, maybe you're not back to the like 180 BPM, like just plain sitting, which tune into our other episode if you want to hear more about that story. But it has created basically like new challenges in your stress that you've had to kind of navigate. Is that?
Indeed. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And so what are some of the things, like, was it really just literally physically separating the space, or what are some of the things that have helped you overcome that?
Yeah. So, I mean, that was the physical thing that you could do, right? I was like, I need to literally divide my space so that I have like a new scenery, cause I couldn't go to a coffee shop, right? I couldn't go
Yeah.
to a co-working space. I couldn't even go to the office. Like I was missing my commute, right? Where I had time to process everything that was going on. And my day was very regimented. Like every minute was planned out to a certain extent of like this call, then that call, then work block, then this, then that. So I didn't have that division. So that was kind of the first thing, was like figuring out how can I structure my physical and time related workspace in a way that worked. And then it was kind of doubling down on the content we kind of tiptoed around in our last session about my afib process. So what kind of distilled out of that was, and you mentioned the other episode. If you want a full story, you can head there. But the short is, I have a heart condition called atrial fibrillation, and what I was able to do is for myself figure out a process of how I can mitigate my stress levels through kind of a 4 punch list kind of setup. And it just happens to accord, because it sounds nice and it's fun, with the acronym for the condition. So the condition is called atrial fibrillation, and it's AFib for short, AFIB. And I made kind of a 4-step process for myself that I've started to share with people, that helps me kind of gauge, mitigate, and de-escalate stress factors kind of as they come up, in a way to kind of prevent myself from getting to that like shit place that I was before.
Well, I'm a total sucker for just clear, simple, straightforward frameworks. So I was itching for this last time. You've had some time to kind of process it, clarify it, refine it. Can you walk us through what the 4
Absolutely.
steps of AFib are?
Yeah, for sure. So the as I've defined it, so again, it hits that AFIB construct. So the first one is ask. To me, what was most important and what has resonated with folks is the first step in figuring out any kind of scenario is asking yourself like some really important questions. Like, do I need to do all of these things right now? Are these the right people to be doing it with? Is this the right scenario? Is this the right, circumstance? Are these the right things? It's kind of open-ended in that sense, but it's asking yourself the difficult questions, not just like, am I happy, right? That's a very difficult question to answer, right? Very complex. You can do something more tactical, right? Is this particular task I'm working on right now, as I'm experiencing stress, helping or hurting that stress level, right? And it's not always a binary answer, right? Which kind of leads us to the F in this process. So once you get through like asking those questions, writing down what you can, that helps me.
I just want to pause you before you get to the F, because the asking the difficult questions is something that has been so kind of transformational for me, even in the last few months, where I was asking myself questions before, especially before I committed myself to something, but they weren't necessarily the right questions. I was asking myself, can I do this? Should I do this? but not necessarily like what you're saying is, how will this impact my stress levels? You know,
Correct.
another question that's kind of been really relevant for me is, what does saying yes to this mean saying no to?
Right.
Which then becomes less about, do I want to do this? Can I do this? Do I want to do this? Which those questions, the answer can both be yes. And maybe you still shouldn't commit to that thing because it means saying no to self-care or to something else that's more valuable to you, or et cetera. Anyway, so I just wanted to get into what those difficult questions can look like.
No, for sure. And to flip what you said too, it could be, what does saying no to this allow me then do?
Yes.
Right. Because that, I think that you can get on what's called, I mean, I've heard it called this, I don't know if it's official, but like you can get on a no high, right? Once you start saying no to stuff, you start to feel empowered. Like you have control over your scope again. Right. And that could be like saying no to social things. That could be saying no to work things, personal things, whatever it is. But once you start getting in the habit of like, no, you start to get like, oh, well, I can just say no to everything. This is going to be great. Like, no,
I'm not there yet. Like, I'm just not there. I'm in the point where I'm like, I'm saying no, but it still feels terrifying every time, even though I've been saying no to increasing things for like years.
And we can go on a no tangent for hours. I think the important thing to pull out of that is, number one, when you say no to an opportunity, there is always other ones that will come up. You may have to dig for them. You may have to fight for them, but there's other things. Saying no now does not ruin your future, right? In most cases, I don't want to say every scenario, but most times when people are worrying about saying no to taking on another project, right? There's probably a reason you're doubting it. Listen to your gut, right? Yeah. I think that's just a good staple piece. But what that kind of, it's perfect tie into the F that we were talking about a second ago. The F in my process is fuck it, right? You have to figure out, like, it's time to trim the fat. Like, what are the things that are not enabling you to either de-stress, to finish the thing at hand, to sleep well at night, to get the thing done, to turn off your computer at a good hour at the end of the day instead of working till midnight, on your own. What are the things you can chop off, right? And saying fuck it to these things that are just not serving you, that are not giving you an advantage to get to the next thing is kind of like that no high we were talking about a second ago. Like, the second you can start hawking off things based on your responses to those questions, you can start to chain these things together.
Okay. And before we get into the I and the B, I just have a question here, because I am so in favor of the fuck it rule, but how do you gauge? Do you have any tips to help gauge what it is that you should be saying fuck it to, as opposed to, like, well, how do you know what things are really, sometimes it can be easy to not see the things that are holding us back.
It's kind of a cop out, but it depends. I think it really comes down to what you're personally okay with saying no to, right? Trimming out. I think there's different buckets of this, right? You could be saying fuck it to, like, I'm not taking on this extra project at work because it will overload me and I won't be able to finish the things I already signed up for, right? That could be one scenario. You could say fuck it to a toxic friend in your group that's doing nothing but breeding negativity, right? And that's a much harder thing to do, right? Yeah. To just cut people out or start to wean back, right? But when you weigh it against, like, is this serving me? Is this serving them? Are we helping each other, right? It's a very difficult conversation to have, but that could be a vein of the fuck it thing, right? Yeah. Or it could be, as simple as, what? I want that extra glass of wine at the end of the day. Fuck it. I'm going to have it, right? There's certain things like you need to let go of in order to give yourself the chance to breathe. And sometimes in that case, it's the rules you've set yourself in, right? The boxes you've put yourself in. So it can really be applied, I think, to any scenario, but you're right in the sense of, like, it's oftentimes hardest to identify what to say that to, right? To what level and to what extent.
And to what level. Yeah. Because what I'm hearing from you is that it's not that you have to just wake up tomorrow and say, cut this client or this friend who maybe isn't serving you out of your life 100%, but maybe there is some weaning back there. Maybe you do have to actually fire a client, but maybe if it's a friend, you're setting boundaries or constraints around how you hang out with them. Absolutely. So maybe when they're calling you and being like, hey, come somewhere in half an hour, and you're like, is this really gonna bring me fun or pleasure? You say, no, you know what? Like, give me 48 hours notice or something.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And what's funny is, like, a lot of this, this sounds easy to do, right? It's 4 steps, it's 4 things, right? But you can sit for a month figuring out the right questions. Like I'm very well aware
Yeah.
that it sounds easy and it sounds clean and it's nice to remember, but in practice, it's not that simple. Right. And I want to make sure that's
Mm-hmm.
very clear. Like I'm not purporting this as some kind of like self-fixing thing you can do every time you get stressed out. Like it's a process. It takes time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's broken down for me and I'm the one who wrote the damn thing, but it's what I found it's helped me to go back to. Will it work for you? Maybe. Will parts of this work for you? Maybe. I don't know. I don't like being prescriptive in the sense of like,
Mm-hmm.
if you follow these 4 steps, everything will be fine. And they go in order and you can do them for everything, because that's not true, right? To
Mm-hmm.
all the things we're talking about, there's different levels of being able to ask questions. Like if you can't say no to a project at work, right? You just can't do it, right?
Yeah.
Is it serving you today? Maybe not, but you have an obligation to finish it, right? Let's just say whether this is a client commitment, like we can use that as a good example, right? You may have to hunker down, so to speak, and get it done. But as long as you now can ask those questions, how am I going to do this next time, right? How am I going to say no next time? Like that's still a good learning.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing here, and I agree, because as we got into on our last conversation, this is more than just individual deep. Like this is in our culture, in our industry in particular, the digital industry, digital agencies, just straight up in the business world, in the entrepreneur world, there's this idea that more is better and that perfectionism is always the goal and that it's up to you to do more and more and more. So expecting that you can just bring in a simple framework and solve everything overnight, it just isn't realistic, not for yourself and not for society. I know that through my own experience, a lot of what, like all of these different elements, right? And all of these are things that I think, without knowing specifically your framework, I've been working on to some degree or another. But what I'm hearing, that the goal here is to shake it up a bit. It's to shift how you're going to approach things next time. It's to make these like tweaking changes that ultimately bring you somewhere different, not down the path of like burnout and overwhelm ideally, but that these are tools. These are tools in your tool belt. These are processes you can apply. They're not a magical fix everything solution, because you're not going to fix your deepest, darkest problems with the magical fix all solution. Just
Right.
sorry, but you're not. Yeah.
You're right. And I think regardless of whichever step of this process you decide to take on, or if any, it comes down to self-reflection, right? And it's about deciding what's going to work for you, right? All of these steps may not work. Maybe they work in a different order, whatever. I'm just presenting an option, right, of something that may be of use. And what's interesting is it leads us into another framework, but I want to get through the AFib piece first.
Yes, let's finish.
I think there's a thing that interweaves in this that I think you can figure out on a personal level, because there's one of those things like how you show up every day, quite literally or virtually, is going to dictate like the way your day goes, right? No matter what, if it's at work or it's with your family or it's with a child, a partner, whatever it is, the way you come to the table is exactly how people are going to respond. And that's not to say like everyone needs to put on that face and a veil, like to hide whatever's going on, inside. But there's a portion of like, you need to wrestle with what you're kind of dealing with before you're able to help others deal with whatever they're dealing with. And that could be like emotional, or that could literally be like, I need to help you with this project. Like you can take it in any vein. It's broad enough that it'll cover it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a super quick story on that note. So I'm someone, most people who have listened to this podcast or met me would say that I'm someone who cares a lot about communication, and compassionate communication in particular. And, I've been in a partnership for more than 8 years, and this actually fits into your framework as well. And we have, myself and my partner, we have such strong, good, amazing communication techniques. But recently, I've had a lot going on at work. He just moved into a new, basically, part of his industry, and is not someone who's usually stressed at all and has been quite overwhelmed. And one day we were having an interaction in the last week or two, and I used the F of AFib, and I just said, fuck it, to compassionate communication. And I was like, it's funny because this is a choice I make basically every day when I want to say something. It just wants to blurt its way out of my mouth in like a terrible, unproductive way. And every single time I make the choice. And this time I just said, fuck it. I was like, you know what? I'm going to just be aggressive and rude and speak in a not super great way. And he met me in that place. Like he also was crappy back to me. And we had a very charged, very unpleasant interaction. And yet I don't regret that choice maybe I was regretting that choice, but one thing that you've kind of shown me, even just through this conversation, is I'm like, right, that was important for me to make that choice and kind of say, fuck it, because I've been making that choice to be compassionate over and over and over again for X number of years. And I saw how ineffective that was. You know, I saw that the way I chose to show up, he met me there. And, you know, there's been times where I've tried, but haven't quite succeeded. And he's been able to carry that other 40%. But this time I didn't try at all and he didn't try at all. And that doesn't mean that it's on me, but it certainly freaking reminded me of why I choose to make this choice, even though sometimes it's challenging, even though communicating compassionately just feels so difficult. Sometimes I literally have to walk away until I can be in that mind space.
Yeah.
But now I feel reaffirmed. You know, it had been 4 years or something since I'd seen just how terrible that kind of sort of interaction can be. So anyway,
I'm grinning because there's you haven't heard my 4-step process before, to be clear to all the listeners that are tuning into this, but you've just defined the I. The I in this process is incubate, right? Double down on the things that matter, the things that will help you get to the next piece, right? In that particular interaction, incubating that relationship of just saying, we need to have this raw thing to like get over whatever this ugh that we're feeling is right at this moment, is sometimes what you have to do, right? You have to double down on the things that are going to get you to the next step. And in that case, it was saying fuck it, right? And just letting it out, right? And very clearly, your partner needed to do the same thing, right? So that you can both get to the point of like, all right, now that we've unloaded, right? We're not carrying this weight anymore. We can move forward because we choose to, we want to make this work, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And the same thing goes for business, right? When you incubate with your team, with your clients, with your bosses, with your teammates, with the people you manage, right? You double down on them and the things that make you all work together and the things you've done successfully together. You know, you're able to curate a success path, you know, if you want to get like businessy with it, in your home life and your work life and whatever it is. So it's, you know, you've already asked the questions, right? You've cut out the things that you know, or made a plan to cut out the things that you know are not working for you. You also then have to identify in this I, the things that are working for you and double down on them. The example I use when I give this talk is, if you have 2 hours of time, right? And normally your plan of attack, and you have a list of tasks, right? Your normal plan of attack is, you know, I got to get these 5 things done, and I know I can get 2 things done in this 2-hour block if I split them up, you know, 1 and 1. And one thing I know I really like to do, and it'll get me where I need to go. And the other thing I'm not too thrilled about, but I need to get it done anyway, but it's not pressing. You know, the normal plan of attack is great. Divide and conquer, spend an hour on the thing you like, do an hour on the thing you don't like. Well, my take is sometimes you just like, do the 2 hours on the thing you enjoy, right? Get deep in it, get in it, like get to the point where you're happy with the result. You're not rushing through to make that next hour, you know, count for dread, right? When you have that opportunity to, which not everyone does, and I recognize this, to control your schedule, right? You can weigh things and you can incubate those things that are going to help you be in a better position to tackle the next problem, right? That's the way you can spin it. And that, you know what, if maybe the smartest thing from a time manager standpoint is not to spend 3 hours, I don't know, working on this seemingly simple task. But if it brings me enough joy to then make me want to do the other thing, right? Then do it. Like, and that's aside from pandemic stuff. Like, we're in a new world right now. Like, not to mention all the other crazy social justice things that are happening, unfolding all around us. While we're trying to stay informed and be active and support and all those types of things, we're also dealing with this entirely, you know, fucked news cycle with regard to all the whichever side of the aisle you sit on, you know, all the things with that. And then layer on this crazy infectious pandemic. Like, this is like a trifecta of just bad, right? So if we can find a little bit of joy on something, right, and we can channel that to then allow us to do the next thing, like, you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't.
Yeah, I think that's really important to bring up. And I love, you know, when I think of I and everything that you're saying, the word that comes to me is iterate, just because I love that word. And I to me, that kind of represents a lot of the same things you're saying, which is that you have another chance to try again. You know, like, you just do the best you can this time. I know we've been finding in internal meetings something similar, which is that normally we're super intense on productivity. We hate useless meetings. We're spending, you know, 5 to 10 minutes on a segue. Everyone just shares something super brief and move on. We've been letting ourselves maybe take 20, even 25 minutes of the 90-minute call to just have people share what's going on in their lives. Is it the most productive thing in the world? No, but is it helping everybody kind of feel good about where they're at and just feel a little bit more connected, a little bit like less pressure in this insane time? Hell yeah. So as I was just training someone else to lead these meetings, I actually brought that in. I was like, I know this isn't exactly the agenda, etc., but just allow yourself to iterate it. If you're feeling that everyone needs a little bit more time to connect and it's not going to negatively impact, it's not going to drive us off a cliff or something, that's okay. That's okay if we're not the most productive meeting in the world every single literal meeting.
I mean, and what we're finding as more data is recorded from those who are fortunate enough to be able to work from home is folks are way more productive at home. And I don't know yet if that's because they're in their own space and they can figure it out and they can kind of power through that. That's thing one. Thing two could be they're working way more than they should, right? To either distract themselves from the world around, or because they're not feeling like they're being as productive as they should be, right? Or three, we've somehow figured out some magical pathway, especially in our industry, that we didn't need to be face-to-face for everything, and that actually heads down time helps us do more, right? And it could be a combination of all those things. We don't know yet. It's too early. But it's important to know that when we're trading off that interaction, those things you're talking about, the connectivity that we normally would have got doing other things. And I don't even mean at work. Like for me, I never wanted to do the work from home thing because I didn't feel like I could bond with my workmates, right? But I knew if I did, at least after work, I can go meet them for drinks, right? Or I can go to dinner with a friend. Right now, like that's not even an option. So there's no social fix to the day-long no contact. Right. So when we talk about you extrapolate like my scenario across, right, I'm sure your teammates are feeling the same way in some vein of like, well, that extra 5 minutes you spent in that meeting just talking about, the coffee you spilled on the counter made up for like 3 days worth of interaction they would have normally had.
Yeah.
Right. And we're missing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. And I think it's important. I think, especially as this continues, it was one thing, and, it depends on your area, where and how fast the response was. But I know in my area, we actually responded quite quickly and like locked down, and people were pretty respectful and stuff. And now 6 months later, people are going slightly crazy. They're like, how long are we going to keep doing this? And these kinds of moments of interaction and connectivity, I agree with you, Taylor. Like they're just so important to helping us feel connected, because we can't go out and get that in the way that we could before.
Right.
And we don't, not just that, but we don't know when we're going to be able to again.
That's
and when we do, there's a lot of questions and stress and et cetera. Like, are we going to hang out outside or inside? And what's that going to look like? Are we going to share each other's airspace? There's a lot there.
Yeah. And I think we're all growing as individuals. I mean, in the beginning of this, I was very much when I saw friends and family out doing social things, when we knew that this was too dangerous, like I was the person that would call them and give them an earful. I was that asshole, but that was the way I was coping with not being able to do it myself. Right. And I now can reflect and see how shitty that was. But, I've reached a point, like you said, almost 6 months later, where now like, I'm pretty self-aware on how I'm feeling and all the things that are going on, but I know a lot of folks haven't had to sit with themselves and figure out, the way their brain works and the ways I've had to because of the heart stuff, So I'm realizing, and this took a lot to get me there, but there are people that are doing that right now for the first time, right? Mm-hmm. So those people that are right now bursting at the seams, that are breaking the rules, quote unquote, that are going out beyond what their original comfort zone is, are those who have hit a breaking point. And there's a level of empathy that I have now that I didn't have when this started, right? Where I'm understanding like, okay, you have been socially isolated for this amount of time and you were not prepared for this.
And no one can blame you for that. We don't have a social script to help you prepare for it either.
Right. And no one has this, right? There was no game plan with regard to individual, right, attacking this. But what's cool about we've been really good about teeing up the next thing today. So the last piece of that, right, is the be. And it's literally that. It's learn to be. Right? Learn to just be, try to be mindful, try to be present, try to be in the moment that you're in, right? It's very easy, especially right now, to try to plan every next move, right? Whether it's like, what am I going to do what am I going to do in 4 hours? What am I going to do for the next project? What am I going to do wherever? And sitting with yourself, right? And being intentional about your time, whether that's in a workplace or in a work setting, or with your personal social sphere, or with family, like being able to recognize like, this is what I need right now, or this is what my partner needs right now, or my kid or my coworker or whatever, and I'm going to support them doing that and be present in that, right, will do you so much more good than trying to multitask, number one, which we've scientifically proven is impossible.
I know. Yeah.
Although
Just
we all
single
do it,
task, don't
right? All of
multitask. I
us,
know. Yeah.
you know, and then the second vein of that is like when you are able to give your focus to something, right? To be involved in a conversation, the connectivity you get from that is tenfold than if you're kind of mentally in another place. And that's not to say like it's not going to happen, right? There's going to be
Mhm.
times like where you can't bring your whole self to the table, but you have to
Yeah.
be able to recognize that and go, all right, whether you tell that to the person you're with or not is on you, but like you need to know like I'm not fully here right now because I've got
Mhm.
XYZ distracting me, whether it's personal, work, whatever. And acknowledging that is already a step in the right direction, right? Instead of being scatterbrained, chicken without a head, running around trying to put out fires. Like knowing like I saw a meme the other day. It was like a response to an email. Sorry, I lost complete control over the day. And I was like, God, I resonate with that so much because like, 1 o'clock will come around and I'm like, what have I done today? And I'm like, 5, 6 Zoom calls already in, haven't got to the task list I meant to do, but I
Mhm.
had to do those other things,
Yeah.
so like being mindful that like, I had to get through those to get to this next thing is okay. I can't give myself a ton of shit for not getting to that list yet. Tomorrow I can do better, right? I can ask those
Yeah.
questions. I can cut what I don't need. I'll lean into what I can, and then I'll be present when I'm there.
Yeah, yeah, which brings me back to the incubate or iterate, right? Which is that give
Yeah.
yourself permission. It's okay to not do perfect today. It's okay to recognize you have another chance tomorrow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. And I perceive that kind of as we've gone into it, as you've given me each of the letters in the acronym, we've been able to really dig into what they mean. But I also heard you mention that this isn't the only framework that you use. So what other framework, do you use, and how is it different from this one? What kind of different situations might you use it in?
Yeah, this other one is relatively new. I was so personally, I've been seeing a stress coach
Mhm.
to try to help. So it's been kind of um, parasitic and helpful. And one that I was very blunt with. I'm here to help myself, right? And like, let's figure out, make sure I'm on like a pulse check on my stress. But I'm also going to steal your content and put it into my kind of stuff. So we
At
kind of
least
like
you're
laid the
transparent.
yeah. I
Yeah.
was like, I want to take some of this stuff. And so one of the things my coach gave me was something called the ruler framework. It's about emotional gauging, and that sounds very fluffy, but it really has a practical application to both your emotional well-being and your business acumen on how you approach situations. So the ruler
Okay.
framework is a 6-step thing, and it's not necessarily
Mhm.
like as in depth as the AFib thing where it's got all this complexity. It is relatively
Mhm.
simple. So the R in the ruler framework, and the first one is recognize, right? If you can recognize how you're feeling or how you're approaching a situation, that's the first step, because that allows you to understand it, right? Figure
Mhm.
out what's what. And then once you have somewhat understanding, it brings you to the L, which is label, right? You can label this feeling. I am feeling angry. I am feeling disappointed. I am confused, whatever.
Mhm.
It allows you to then move to E, which is express, to say it out loud, right? To yourself or to the people you're with. I am not comfortable with this. I feel behind. I am good with this. I'm content. I'm happy, whatever it is. And then ultimately the last R is to regulate. So the next time this feeling comes up, you know how to handle it, right? You already have a
Mhm.
label for it. You know what it's called. You know how it makes you feel. You know what it's going to do for you. So you can, rewrap the ruler, so to speak,
Mhm.
and continue to go back in that framework. Okay, I've recognized, I now understand, I've labeled this problem. I can express what it's doing, what it isn't doing, so I can regulate it going forward. And then you can
Mhm.
start to categorize the things you're experiencing in a regimented way of going, wait, why do I feel funky right now? Right? Oh, okay. It's because
Mhm.
this thing came down the pipe and it made me feel this way and I acted this way and now I need to do this. Right? So that next time you can skip some of those steps, or it's got to go through each phase to get it done, as opposed to skipping around.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so ruler, recognize, label, express, regulate. I really like that. So, what would you say? Like, would you say the ruler is more of kind of for acute situations, and AFib is kind of for more chronic situations, or are they interchangeable? Or what might cause someone to choose or
Yeah.
understand that one of these would be better than the other?
So I learned ruler after the AFib thing. Um,
Hmm.
but I think they're very much like parallel in some way, shape,
Okay.
or form. Like I think the AFib thing is a good way to structure like a holistic, I'm going to approach this larger situation possibly, because it's harder to run through kind of that in the minutia, because you can do one
Yeah.
without the other, right?
Hmm.
Whereas the ruler framework is kind of an ordered thing, like recognize,
Hmm.
understand it, label
Mhm.
it, express it,
Mhm.
regulate it, right? So
Mhm.
that could
Mhm.
be very macro, right? But it's more orderly in the sense you have to go through one to get to the next, right? Where
Mhm.
the AFib
Mhm.
thing is like, no, today all I'm doing is saying fuck it, right? That could be your thing,
Yeah.
right? And I'm doing that by being mindful, right? You could skip around, but it's important with that you address all four at some way, shape, or form. You know, it doesn't have
Yeah.
to be in order. And then that could be different phases of your life, phases of a project, phases of the day, you know, where ruler is like, whoa, first thing is I have to recognize I'm experiencing this, right?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
specific in its framework of being tied to your emotion. And
Mm.
I think people detach from that a little bit because like, I'm not
Yeah.
emotional, but it's not
Yeah.
about that. It's about like, how did you react? Right? How
Yeah.
did you respond? That's the thing. It's not emotional in the sense of like, I feel sad. It's, oh,
Mm.
you know, I responded a little more aggressively than I thought, you know, I was going to, you know,
Yeah.
and then being
Yeah.
okay with that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And like the AFib, when I think about the AFib, each of those is kind of a concept that I've sat with and applied and kind of like played with a little bit. And, you know, whether or not I was following this specific framework, you know, I think that these are really, really important concepts to just, as we kind of discussed, shift the focus of your life, kind of shift you out of maybe some of those deep patterns.
Yeah.
Versus the ruler framework, to me, like it's, although I haven't heard of this specific framework, I've used a very similar framework from a stress coach that I have been following, although I haven't been working with her directly. I've been on the edge, you know, do I go with that? And can I do this on my own? Anyway. And that process I find works well for me in the moment. Like when I'm like, when something's going on that maybe I'm not quite understanding, this ruler framework, like I really like that because I think it's very tempting for us to sweep our stress or our emotions or et cetera just under the rug. As you
Yeah.
said, and be like, oh, I'm not super emotional or something like that, because we have this idea that admitting our stress, admitting our emotion is vulnerability and therefore weakness. Which is a whole other thing we could go on to many hour rabbit hole about.
Yeah.
But this is really, you know, it's removing, I think, some of the shame from that process and just saying, you can literally just recognize where you're at. There's something here that I'm reacting to maybe a little bit differently, or there's something here that I want to pay attention to. And then understanding it, just asking, okay, understanding what it is that I'm feeling, which leads to a label. I like that because it makes the understanding specific. You
Right.
don't have to like understand literally everything about your emotion. You just have to give what you're experiencing a label. And I found that it's if I am feeling a strong emotion like anger or sadness or something, being able to go through these pretty similar 5 steps actually really, really helps me. And that label step is kind of the key, where I'm like, okay, I'm feeling angry.
Yeah.
And then immediately my brain wants to go into like massive overexpression. And that's probably where my brain wants to start. But making sure that you're taking the time to like create some distance in between the experience and the reaction is what I'm hearing that this is really powerful for, because by the time you're getting to the express and regulate stage, you've already taken a bit of space to understand what's going on for you in terms of
Right.
self-awareness.
Yeah, and we've spoke very abstractly about these, and maybe it's helpful to be more transparent, and we can give an exact example into each, right? So you want to talk about a fast the for the AFib one, right? To not give away all the pieces of the previous episode of our podcast, but part of my process was like, or part of my thing was I was taking on too much stuff, right? I was overwhelming myself. So when you talk about the high level, right? I had to ask myself, like, are all of these things important? Do I need to be doing all of them right now? Right? Specifically, do I need to be taking on freelance clients outside of my day job on top of all my volunteering? Right? Was that actually serving me, or was it helping me monetarily? Like, what was it doing? Right?
Yeah.
And then I realized some of it wasn't. It was just for fun, right? Or I was overextending by committing to 5 volunteer gigs on top of 2 clients, right? So I had to start cutting.
Oh gosh, so
Yeah.
been there.
Yeah. So once projects ended, I didn't re-up, right? Or I postponed, right? Or I said, you know what? I can't commit to that volunteer thing now, but I can do in 6 months. Right. So that was my fuck it stage. And my incubate was I needed to dive back and realize I needed to do some things for me that weren't for a client, that weren't for another initiative, to re-spark my like joy of making again.
You give it down.
Yeah, exactly. That was my incubate. And then my B was like remembering to be there when I was in those other things. Like, not when I'm working on the freelance thing, not to be worrying about the day job. When I'm at the volunteer thing, not to be thinking about the deadline, right? When I'm working on the fun stuff, not to be thinking about work the next morning as much as I could. It's not easy to do, but that's kind of, that was that one. Right. And so that's a practical AFib construct. I think what's interesting is the ruler thing is not only new for me, but I've also found newer applications. So a good example of that is, so while I've been in the industry around 8 or 9 years now, I've only been in the UI UX space for almost 2. So I'm still relatively new there. A lot of the skills are adaptable, and you can take all the frameworks of design and marketing and creative and move it in. But there's some practical things you don't always get, right?
Yeah.
So we were starting a new project that was something that when I was able to sit back and look at, I realized I was nervous about because it wasn't something I'd done before, right? And it was high visibility, and I was feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome, right? Like, who am I to be able to do this? Right, on top of all the other things, like the other better people that can handle this project at this enormous company. Like, why is it mine? Right. So I was able to recognize, like, you're being combative, right? When they're talking about what are the tasks we need to do to get this done, because I didn't know what needed to be done. Right. I didn't know that at the time, but I realized that I was kind of a dick. Right. So like I circled back with my team and I was like, hey, I'm sorry, like if I was like abrasive, but I'm realizing that I was, right. And I'm trying to unpack what was going on there. So that was my recognize, right. It was like, whoa, you're being an asshole, right. Or you're being a little more defensive than you need to be, was more realistically what it was. Understanding was like, well, what's driving this? And it's like, oh, this is new. You're just uncomfortable, right. You got to kind of lean into it a little bit, but now we know. Right. The label was like, oh, this is imposter syndrome. This is feeling like you can't do this for whatever reason, even though you've already proven that you can. Right. It's just that false fear. And express was, then I turned back and I apologized to the people I was defensive with. I was like, this is a me thing, 100%. Like I'm recognizing that, and you didn't call it out, and I'm sorry that you had to experience that. So I know that I need to just like check myself a little bit in between, when I know that I'm just feeling vulnerable, right? Or anxious about the thing upcoming. And then regulating is now going forward before I get defensive, right? I need to just know, like, whoa, like you're approaching this because it's new and fresh, and that's what's scaring you, not any of the other things. And it's not anyone else's problem to deal with except for yours, right? So like take it down a notch, right? And that's been really helpful to help me figure out how to approach the next thing, right? Or when our kickoff happens, to not come in accidentally daggers drawn, right? When that's not what I want to do. Like, I am excited about this project. I'm also nervous about it, So there's like that second vein, that clearly which one came to the meeting, right? As opposed to which one stayed in my head.
Oh, that is, I'm so glad that you gave those 2 specific examples, because I perceive they really, really put things into context in just a beautiful and succinct way. And honestly, I'd love to dive deeper into, this idea of imposter syndrome, and how that impacts your stress, and how you've kind of unpacked from that. I do see that we're running a little short on time, and we could totally go down that rabbit hole. So maybe we'll save that a little bit more for another interview. But for now, other than these kind of 2 frameworks, like what would you say, just as we move towards the end here, if someone's really interested in applying these 2 frameworks, or really making a change, but they're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, is there anything that you can suggest kind of on just the mindset or small changes level that might help someone access these frameworks kind of mentally when they need to, or, make a change?
Yeah. I think there's 2 things. And the first one's kind of 2 small parts, which it's kind of an either or scenario. You need to find some way to express how you're feeling, right? Or how you're experiencing stress. If you have someone you can talk to and be genuinely honest with, great. If you're not comfortable with that, or you don't have someone that you really like want to kind of let that deep in, which is totally fine, by the way, journal. And I don't mean like dear diary. I mean, just like write down, today pissed me off, right? There's a manual process.
Preach, once again.
There's a manual process of getting it out of your brain and into something else that gives your like whole brain structure the chance to go, now it's no longer something I need to think about, right? You're just transferring it. So you need that transference. And whether that's in person or in paper, either one, do it. And this is specific to like, do not open a Word document on your computer. Get a piece of paper, write it down. Even if you burn the piece of paper afterwards, it's the manual transcription, right? So that's number 1. And I think number 2, and this is, you can say this conditional to the pandemic, but I've been saying this for as long as people have been listening, but give yourself a break, right? You're not going to change this stuff overnight, right? There's no quick fix to de-stressing. There's no quick fix to the right productivity. There's no quick fix to like working from home. There's no quick fix to a pandemic, right? You have to, it's all about incremental improvement. If you are better or different than you were yesterday, then you've already won, right? Stop expecting this like this complete turnaround, this 0 to 100 process. Like you have to put in the work, and you also have to know when to rest. Because if
Yeah.
you don't do both of those things, all you're doing is turning your wheels in the mud.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yes, 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 yes. Oh, such powerful words of wisdom. What an amazing follow-up episode to our last conversation. You know, last time we talked a lot more about what the issues are, you know, your story, a little bit more about kind of the state that we live in and how it's okay to not subscribe to it. But this session has just been so, so, so full of practical, actionable advice that you can literally stop listening right now and go out and apply. And I think that together, both of these are just so, so, so critical to not just understanding the issue, but moving past it. So thank you so, so much, Taylor. This has just been really incredible. Before we move to where the audience can find you, did you have any last kind of words of wisdom that you want someone listening to walk away with?
No, not so much. I want to make sure, like, you know, while I've said some cool things, you opened the venue for this to happen, right? So I think that's important to acknowledge as well. That it's podcasts like this, it's article series that come out of these podcasts that allow people to, number one, express their story, like myself, right? But two, allow people that are searching for commonality and community in an environment where we can no longer do that, to find those things. And it's important that those of us who can continue to show up and do this, right, to a certain level, but also be mindful that, like, if you want to skip an episode or two, it's okay, right? So.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Don't be too hard on yourself. That's what this has been. I have an accountability partner where this has basically been my accountability for 2 years, and I still need it. I still need her to remind me of that. And I think it's okay to lean on each other for this kind of stuff because it's a big old scary world out there. And there's a lot of pressure on us as individuals to be saving it on our own. And I don't think that's necessary. All right, Taylor, did you want to just tell our audience if they want to find out more about you, maybe about your framework, or basically check out anything more about you or anything you might have for them? Where would they go?
Yeah, I'm at Taylor Cashdan, TaylorCashdan everywhere. TaylorCashdan.com is my portfolio site where you can see some stuff, some recent speaking engagements, recordings, other podcasts, things like that. I'm on social media under those same handles. I have a side project that's called Black Soul Club. It's a little like occult-ish coffee brand that's been my fun side project. So if you want to see what I'm up to in my downtime, you can head there. I also have 2 fundraisers running right now on 2 typefaces on my site, store.taylorcashdan.com. All the proceeds, like every nickel, is going towards 1, COVID relief, and 2, some of the social justice, Black Lives Matter support for groups that are helping with those initiatives. So I'd encourage you, if you're into typefaces and just can't find the right venue, feel free to plug it there. Again, I'm not keeping any of that. It's all going to organizations that are outlined on those things. And I encourage you also to check out all the content that's out there. I've aggregated some of it at taylorcashdan.com/stressful stuff. It's just where I've found a lot of the data, and I try to put it together so folks can consume it, because the more we all read, the more we can learn together.
Yes, absolutely. And I will actually say, in case you weren't aware, Taylor, but your episode that we did a few months ago on stress is actually one of our most popular episodes of all time, awesome. Even though it's also one of our longest episodes of all time. And I think that really shows that this isn't just an issue that's close to my heart, that's close to your heart. This is something that people need, that they're hungry for. So if you're listening to this and you're a content creator yourself, please create content, your experience. You don't have to be a master at this. You know, Taylor and I are just 2 people in the world in this industry who have had these experiences, and we just want to make a change because they were painful enough or powerful enough, or however you want to define it, that it's worthwhile to keep the conversation going.
Couldn't say it better myself.
Yeah, awesome. So we'll be including all of the links and stuff we talked about in the show notes, as always. And as always, no matter what your day looks like today, I hope you can have an amazing day. If you can't have an amazing day today, or it's just not working for you, just don't be too hard on yourself. That's all I ask. Take care.